Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first AMA with Phil Squire. My name is Will. I'm Head of Sales at Consalia, and I'm here today to facilitate this session. This is a great opportunity to ask Phil anything, so I encourage you not to hold back. No question is stupid, and I know Phil is going to rise to the challenge. We have a broad range of attendees from different sectors, including telecoms, manufacturing, and SaaS software companies. So I'm really looking forward to hearing the questions and hopefully challenging our CEO. So Phil, over to you.
Well, it's very nice to be here with some slight trepidation because you never quite know what questions may be asked, but we have been sent some questions in advance, I think, Will. So it would be really, really good to maybe kick off with some of those. But just a couple of things, as Will is getting the questions organized, there is a chat function that I'm sure you're all familiar with. And it would be great to get your comments or questions sort of put into the chat box, but very much want to make this, because we're quite a small group, interactive as well. So I think it's not just about my opinion, but I think it's about your opinions as well to some of the questions that have been raised. So yeah, I'm going to call upon you, if you don't mind, to give your points of view alongside mine. And if they're slightly different, that's no problem at all. So, okay, Will.
So to everyone that's kind of inputted a question before this session, thank you very much, because that's really made my life a lot easier. I'm going to start with this one, Phil, which is around the big resignation that we're hearing quite a lot about at the moment. So we've had this question in. My biggest struggle at the moment is recruiting salespeople. How can I attract and retain the best talent at my organization?
It's quite interesting that there seems to be quite a big problem with finding talent at the moment in sales. One of the clients we're working with has 30% of their sales positions are currently open at the moment, and this whole topic of attraction and retention is hugely important. So how do I attract talent? I think, you've got a number of different avenues that one can pursue. I think what we're finding, particularly with the younger people coming into sales, is they're very much driven not just about the job and the salary, but about the general purpose that's behind the organizations who are actually recruiting positions for. So that might have an influence over your ability to actually get people looking at particular jobs that may be vacant. We're doing quite a lot of work with organizations like UCAS, particularly in the United Kingdom, to put sales at the forefront of people's minds as they're coming into the sales profession itself. But that's a long-term project in its own right. So in terms of attraction, I think we're finding people are having to at the moment reevaluate sort of package levels because of the scarcity of salespeople in the market. In terms of retention, I think that the pandemic has had a sort of huge impact on people's well-being, the sense of being valued in an organization, and a lot of this is to do with the ability of organizations to really care, support, and develop their salespeople. So yeah, I mean, these are my two initial thoughts. I don't know if we've got any silver bullets to it, but it definitely is a widespread issue. Be interesting to get other people's comments or thoughts on it themselves.
It's interesting you mentioned the post-pandemic kind of era as we're emerging out of it, because Ian Jones did ask a question as well around what characteristics and behaviours do salespeople need to adopt in order to be successful in the post-pandemic era. I'm wondering if you could comment on that.
I certainly can. And it actually, it's really helpful getting these questions in advance, because it gives you a little bit of time to kind of get your thoughts together. But I know that when the pandemic hit, we produced a thought paper, if you like, a concept about how we felt the situation for salespeople and their relationships and customers might change, and how they needed to adapt their behaviors. And I'm just going to share my screen if I can, to see if I can. I don't know if you can see that, Will.
Yes, I can see it.
It's the kind of space curve, and this might be for Ian and others who might be interested in this particular question. But I think the context of where we are today in the pandemic, and therefore what salespeople need to do, could be discussed in the context of what's happened over the last 2 years. When COVID-19 hit us a couple of years ago, I think we saw many companies go through different phases of, if you like, survival through to a sort of emergence. If I just talk very briefly through these phases. So the survive phase was very much concerned with, protecting cash, sort of trying to get our heads around what the implications would be of the pandemic to the way we do business. And it's very much about cost stabilization. And I think if we were in, at this stage of the pandemic, which is really early on, as a salesperson selling to customers, part of what we would have been doing at that stage is sort of speaking to customers, hearing what challenges and problems that they were going through. Probably as a customer, you may not be open to initially any sort of new ideas at this stage, because it was very much about damage limitation. You had a situation where organizations were potentially going out of business, supply chain being affected. Again, from a customer perspective, looking at, what's going to be our key strategy moving forward as far as our key suppliers and partners are. And knowing that, maybe we're into 6 months, a year of the pandemic at this stage, we know that the world is going to change. There's going to be this sort of new normal, but how are we going to transform? And so the relationship that customers and I think salespeople were having at this stage was one of sort of exploration, realizing that there was going to be a shift in mindset required, but not quite knowing what the future was going to look like, because it was all so new and so fresh. But because the world has also experienced, I think, in the last 2 years, a sort of very much from a digital point of view, a sort of transformation, not just in the way that salespeople are interacting now with customers, but in the kind of technologies that can enable organizations to move very quickly into adopting perhaps new business models. And this phase then, the agile phase of, if you like, the pandemic, would see customers wanting to act fast, perhaps with some sort of knowledge now, what the new norm looked like, and wanting at this point of their buying journey, if you like, buying cycle, to seek out those partners with whom they could start to talk to Of course, this is a huge generalization, and each customer is going to have reacted to the pandemic in different ways. So I understand this is a kind of a generalization, but I think it's across many of the customers that we've worked with. We've seen this in action, and we've seen this actually happening. So if I pick up from the agile phase, then we move into a phase which is very much around co-creation, because businesses have had to move so quickly and so fast. We think that the relationships they have with partners and suppliers and salespeople becomes very creative, and we move into this sort of co-create phase, which is grounded in trust, a trust that the salesperson really understands, the business, the people, the relationships have been tested, we can trust you. But with an added layer of creativity and sort of strategic thought that in a co-creation phase enables salespeople and customers to work together to potentially create new solutions. It's a very sort of an adaptive environment. And then out of this, hopefully to emerge kind of stronger. And we put here the word purposeful and grateful. I come back to sort of purposeful a bit later. So this graph this chart was put together at the beginning of the pandemic. So Ian, to your question, what about the post-pandemic era? The context through which we've been through, and the context through which relationships have strengthened and weakened during this kind of process, suggests that the salespeople in the post-pandemic phase who are going to succeed are those that have actually helped their customers through this change curve, where those trust levels have been established, and who've gone beyond the trust to create that sort of strategic conversation with customers, which leads to added value. And this links also, and I'll pause because Ian, I'm sure you've got your own point of view on it. This kind of leads also to some of the work that was done pre-pandemic by Dr. Julian Birkinshaw, who's at the London Business School, who talked about sources of competitive advantage and was suggesting that emocracy and adhocracy, emocracy, this is the emotional attachment between a company and its suppliers, is going to become more important in the post-knowledge era. And adhocracy being this ability to think quickly on your feet. And I think that where we're at now is very much in that world where the emotional relationships that are created through trust and creativity and sort of being bold and correct, we talk about tactful audacity, are becoming even more important moving forward. Ian, shall I pause there and give you a chance to comment?
Phil, I'm very grateful for you sharing this chart because it certainly reflects some of the things that have happened in South Africa that have impacted my clients, both people who are customers and salespeople. And I think it's brought into very sharp focus some of the anomalies in the role of salesperson that have grown up over many decades. I have to declare that I'm a salesperson by profession, so anything that I say generically about salespeople is not meant to downgrade the function or individuals carrying out that function in any way. But when I used to talk to people about their experience of salespeople and how they would describe salespeople. If they were non-sales professionals, it would be some version of ignorant, lazy, and overpaid.
Yeah.
And it seemed to reflect that many salespeople out there didn't really care about their customers, didn't really care an awful lot about their products, but were very target-driven and were looking to make their target as quickly and easily as possible and reap all the benefits that went along with that. Now, come this COVID experience, which you had so beautifully described in that chart, the time that customers were prepared to spend with people of that ilk reduced to almost completely zero. And the things that salespeople thought they were good for, like conveying information that the customer needed, the customer had accelerated the move to getting all the information that they need from the internet and from published material online. And they had also got to use social media much more as a platform for getting comparative information about what was out there and what they might select for solutions for themselves. So it became a bit of a story whereby the customer was looking for the kind of contribution in the agile and co-create phase that you've illustrated in that chart. And didn't find too many takers on the sales end of the equation. And I think that the outcome of that, certainly in some cases that I've observed in South Africa, is that there is an enormous amount of confusion among salespeople as to their new role, if I can put it that way. There is a gap widening between salespeople and their management who are saying, hey guys, this is the target, go out there and sell, and bring in the business because we need it for our survival. And I'm not at all surprised that there aren't a lot of people rushing to become salespeople. And I am noticing a trend here in South Africa, certainly, of people moving out of the profession because it isn't what they were used to, and they're not quite sure what it should be anymore. And there aren't too many people giving them the guidance that they would like and that they would need on how they need to reposition themselves.
Well, that's really interesting. You raised, again, quite a lot of sort of points. I wonder if any of the others on the call would like to kind of chip in and comment on what Ian has just described as the situation in South Africa.
Yeah, I can add a comment there if I may, Phil.
Yeah, Ryan, of course.
Yeah, I was very similar experience. And as you know, I've been doing some of my own research over the last few years in this space, and it aligns pretty much to what Ian was just out describing. So if you describe what's worst about the profession, I think Ian did a very eloquent job there. What clients really want is obviously people that are dedicated to them. They understand the industry, understand the technology, the landscape, are committed to delivering success and all the other things that come along with that. And I think since COVID, those qualities are even more in focus. And I think by nature of the way we're interacting with clients now, that's the way that it's turned out. So that the other side of the relationship, which you might call the softer side, which is the meeting in person and the general sort of rapport building, conversational type of relationship, I think has obviously fallen by the wayside by the very nature in which we're interacting with clients now. So it is distilled down to, on an individual level, what you can bring as value to the client, and if it's early in the relationship, you need to demonstrate that, and that's your opportunity to do that. And from your organization, the vendor organization perspective, it's about how they're understanding and proposing to solve the problems. So really just aligned to what Ian was suggesting there, that it's focused on bringing value to the client more so than ever now. So I think that's the big shift.
And there's I wonder if I will, if I can just add one more comment
Absolutely, yeah.
to that, unless there are any questions from the others here on the call as well. Just put them into chat, but otherwise I may dominate too much.
We do have one question that was submitted that I think
Okay.
is quite aligned to what's been spoken about,
Okay.
which is to do with sales organizations setting incredibly ambitious targets, that it's been quite difficult to achieve them. So as a sales practitioner, do you have any thoughts about how you should approach your sales leadership team or your sales management team to kind of bring them back into reality?
Are you suggesting your target?
This isn't my personal question.
You're talking about your own personal sales targets.
Yeah.
No, I think we have seen sometimes very unrealistic targets, and that's linked with thresholds, and that links with commission, and that if they're unrealistic targets, I think it's dangerous. And I think if it's not set at the right levels, then people will obviously vote by leaving. And we've seen that across a number of organizations that we've worked, where the pressure on group sales directors, for example, to achieve targets, to serve shareholder interests, has been so significantly strong that it's sort of rippled down throughout the entire organization, and it's caused huge problems, like you say, the great resignation question kind of earlier on. I think a lot of it comes down to the relationship that a sales leader has with his sales teams. And I think it's to do with intent. And I guess a combination of intent and time. If you believe that your sales director has the intent not to set such high targets, but has been forced to do it, you might give the sales director some leeway in not leaving immediately, in the good faith that they will be able to sort out more realistic targets later. But that is also connected. Oh, sorry, was someone going to ask a question on that? Maybe not. Okay. But I think that's also linked to purpose, because if you really believe in the purpose that your organization is setting out to achieve, you will then, it's more likely to drive loyalty and patience with dealing with some of the frustrations that you may encounter with rather rigid processes and perhaps unrealistic targets. So I think the last couple of years has been a huge learning curve for both leaders as well as salespeople. I was personally surprised at how few companies readjusted sales targets during the pandemic to reflect the obvious trends that were taking place. And I wondered why those targets weren't readjusted. Is it because of the bureaucracy of sometimes these very large companies not being able to adapt quickly enough? Or was it a fear that stayed with the a fear of the organization to be seen to be setting slightly lower objectives? It's a sort of sign of weakness, perhaps. I'm not sure. I think it would be an area of research, actually, that we should look into, to reflect back on this topic. But if I could add just one other comment about this, which is to do with purpose. And I think that we are seeing a shift at different levels, at a macro level, with economists suggesting that traditional forms of capitalism and capitalistic thinking does not serve the best interests of humanity and the planet. And you're seeing organizations like BlackRock making statements about not investing in organizations that don't have a strong CSR policy and KPIs around it. And I think directors are being held more to more account on the less tangible aspects, perhaps, of the businesses that they're running. And I mean, I think this has got a lot of time yet, to see how this is going to fall out into the sort of pressured sales world in which we live. But I think, to your question, Ian, about what skills are required, I think that salespeople need to be very much in tune with not only the purpose-driven agendas of their own organization, but also of the customers to whom they sell, and that appreciation of purpose, and it's linked with the solutions that salespeople sell, are going to become increasingly more important in this post-pandemic world in which we live. So I think I've answered Ian's question as much as we can on that.
Thank you, Phil.
Yeah, thank you. It's great debate on that one. Well,
Great. I've noticed Ryan's having to jump on another call, but he did submit a question, which is, what is your advice for a client serious about developing a key account management strategy? And what are the pitfalls that you need to avoid?
what is your advice for a client serious about developing a CAM strategy? And pitfalls. God, I think it starts with segmentation and really being thoughtful about which customers would you first of all deem important enough to be called a key account, because we know that the actual cost of setting up an effective key account strategy or key account teams is very high. So I think it would start with a set of criteria that you would establish as a filter through which to do that kind of selection process. A key account may not necessarily be your biggest account because of the nature of relationship you have with them. They may see you as more a transactional kind of supplier, and it may not lend itself to the kind of full support structures needed to support a key account in a strategic sense. So I would start with segmentation. I think one of the things that is a bit of a challenge with selecting key accounts is the buying cycles that those key accounts have. They tend to go through cyclical phases of spending a lot of money and then going quiet, maybe for a couple of years, and then coming up for another sort of reinvestment, if you like, in the kind of solutions that your company's provided. I think the pitfalls to avoid is sometimes the complacency that could be driven with some of the short-term KPIs that are set around key account management, which encourages perhaps key account teams to take their focus off the boil because they can't see one of these big sales opportunities coming their way. And I think that what we're now beginning to see with the advent of account-based marketing, coupled with key account managers, is being able to see ways of keeping your brand in front of your key accounts through the duration of various buying cycles that they're likely to go through. And I think this is a relatively new area in terms of looking at the science that goes behind key account management and key account strategies. So Ryan's question, he's not here to sort of comment on that question. So that may be quite a quick one for me to kind of answer, unless there are other people who would like to comment on key account strategies. But I'll leave it for there as he's left the call. I think we can move on to another question.
Sure, and I'll just pause here before I fire another question to invite any of our attendees to put any questions in the chat function. Is there any comments or reflections on what Phil has just said? Please submit into chat. The danger is, of course, if you don't, we might have to start calling you out.
Okay, well.
Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So, right, I'm afraid I can see that we have some of our apprentices actually as part of our attendees. So I just wanted to welcome Luke. Luke, I believe you're from Ensono and have recently joined our program, and I just wanted to say thanks for submitting some questions. I will read them out, but if you have any kind of feedback for Phil, please be my guest. So Phil, actually, we're kind of taking a step in a slightly different direction. But when looking back at your career, because you've been working in sales for quite a number of years, what were some of the key decisions you made that were pivotal to your success?
Golly. That's
from Luke.
I think it's, let me just go back to some of the notes I made on this question, because it's a very interesting, it's always interesting to look back. When I started off my career, Luke, I was actually in banking. I worked for one of the very large international banks, and I left what was then a very sort of steady career role for one which was then in sales, my first kind of sales role. And I suppose that decision to leave banking for a much more entrepreneurial kind of lifestyle was a key decision. And didn't take me long to actually make that decision, because I knew that I just didn't like working for a big corporation. And so moving into sales was one of the key things that I learned a lot from, and it links a little bit about to one of the questions later on I can see that's been posed. At quite an early stage, I decided to set up my own company. So I think I moved out of banking into sales, was in sales for about 4 years, and then I started my own business. And I think that that when I started my business in the sort of early years, there's a lot of risk associated with this, and a lot of people see risk as failure, or they're worried about failure, and they sort of never take risk. So I think this decision to set up my own company was a pivotal moment, which has contributed to perhaps where we are today. And a lot of my early decisions were not particularly lucrative. It was, I failed a lot. And I think that I've never seen failure as being negative. I've always seen it as being something that you can learn from. I think that really helped, through the trials and tribulations of running your own business. It sort of, you learning from those mistakes helped create a sort of modicum of success. But then I think it was relatively, I didn't go to university until I was very late in my career, and it was in 2004 that I did my doctorate. And that for me was a hugely pivotal moment in my career development. And seeing that interconnect between education and sales was for me a transformative moment? Well, it started in 2004, and of course it continues to this day. So I would say that chance to reflect back on your career as part of the DProf and start to formulate some sort of sense of what mattered was hugely influential. And then in 2006, we created Consalia. This was a joint venture between 4 companies, and it was formed out of actually failure. We lost a big deal to Hewlett Packard, and we lost it because the capital structure of Consalia was not strong enough to deal with a client the size of Hewlett Packard. And so out of failure, if you like, we formed Consalia as a joint venture. And so I would say a lot of the key decisions were driven out of learning from mistakes and sort of taking those learnings and deciding, how are you going to use those to shape a better future? And so I think I've answered the question about key decisions that were taken that were pivotal, Will. So is it Luke or Lucas? I'm not quite sure if it's
Luke.
Luke, yeah. So Luke, thank you for asking that question.
Thank you. So it sounds like you learnt a lot through failure. That's brought
I
you
did.
to where you are today.
I would say, yeah, I've always laughed at failure, actually, because whenever I wish I was one of those people that got things right first time, but that just never, ever happens. So I tend to sometimes, with a certain amount of incredulity, see if there's a way for something to go wrong, I normally find it quite early on. And but out of that, I try and get some learning from it. Yeah.
Great. So Luke, I don't know if that's been helpful or insightful to hear from Phil's mistakes as he's gone through his career, but I wish you all the best as you go through the level 6 B2B program, and I'm sure you'll get to challenge Phil more often as well. Actually, Simon Wheeler's just posted a comment in the chat function.
Right. Okay.
He's currently working on his dissertation with the title, "Can Vision and Coaching be Combined as a Strategy to Reduce Attrition of Sales Professions in the Backdrop of the Great Resignation?"
Oh, gosh.
So
I love that.
Yeah,
that's a fabulous title, Simon. I think
Thank you, Phil.
that is really a great title. Can vision and coaching be combined as a strategy to reduce attrition of sales professionals? Yeah. Well, I think, Simon, we're going to have to call you back onto this conversation when you've finished your dissertation to share your learnings on that, that particular one.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess the inspiration for it is, we've seen a lot of movement within our organization, certainly recently. And obviously there's been a huge amount of media attention to this new phenomenon of the Great Resignation. And really my research project is inspired by a desire to help businesses reduce churn of sales professionals and improve profitability by minimizing talent acquisition costs, because acquisition of high caliber sales professionals, it's expensive, right? And to the point that you made earlier, organizations are having to re-review packages in order to get the right people through the door. So I think we have an opportunity to do something about it. And I think at the heart of my dissertation, the point that I'm looking to try and evidence through research is that traditional employee retention strategies, in the most part in today's climate, are not working. And I think we need a new and fresh and customized approach to try and combat and address this issue.
Such a great topic. I just wonder whether within vision you have the word purpose as well, whether that's a subset of vision.
Yeah, so really at the core, what I'm really researching is, can you reduce employee churn by aligning personal vision and goals to organizational vision and purpose, and thus create a deeper connection with the business. Because
Right.
to your point, that I believe, my hypothesis is that that will drive improved loyalty.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I don't know if Ian's still on the call, but it'd be interesting to hear what Ian has to say about the title of your dissertation.
Yeah, it fascinates me because ever since 2012, when Gallup first started to publish the findings of their research, which showed that the global workforce was, to a very large extent, a high percentage, in excess of 65%, disengaged, either actively, by which they meant people are out there deliberately sabotaging the organization, or at very best have got their CVs out there, and passively doing only that which was necessary to ensure they got paid at the end of the month. And a small percentage were truly engaged in the work of the organization. And it seemed to me in those days, and the stats haven't materially improved over time, that that was a tragedy, both from an employer's point of view and from an employee's point of view. And I spent the most of my time as a coach working with clients as employees and as employers to work on strategies that would allow the purpose of the organization, the vision of the organization, to be made manifest to the people working in the business in such a way that they could make a meaningful contribution through the alignment of what they see as their purpose in life and what they're here in the world to do. And as a result, improve dramatically the engagement of employees with the organization that they work for. And like all things, I've seen some successes and some spectacular failures, but I'm fascinated to discover that it is still a main point of focus for organizations and individuals.
Thank you, Ian. That's great. So Simon, you may want to link up with Ian after the call to get as part of your research. So
it's some really interesting points you make there, Ian, and I think there's probably some good intent out there and some dreadful execution. So, but really interesting. Thank you for the feedback, guys.
That's great. Okay, Will, how are we doing?
So we're doing all right. I've got a question that I've just received, which might link back to this topic. It's a bit negative, but this is it. I see no sense of pride in my salespeople. How can I drive them to believe that this is a great profession to be in? And it's not just about the money side of things. I don't know if you could comment on that, but I think it leads to purpose and coaching and.
Golly. So presumably that's said from a manager's perspective.
Yeah.
I guess. No sense of pride. Golly. God, so much of this has to do with values, isn't it? And beliefs and so on. And it sounds like there's a real fundamental kind of problem at a values misalignment around that. And maybe that is linked, like you said, to purpose. Well, maybe there's it's very difficult to muster pride in an organization in which you have absolutely no belief in what they're doing. So I guess it comes back to that word purpose. So I think it is connected very much with the topic of Simon's kind of dissertation, but said through the lens of a manager. So I guess what could the manager do? It's perhaps to see if he can reestablish a unified commitment to purpose, and that may take some offsite meetings or whatever it takes to kind of get to grips with the fundamental principles of why people join an organization. I don't think it's, personally, I don't think it's been easy with the pandemic to get people together. And I think that there has been a divergence of people's values and beliefs, and you don't have that community that you get by being physically together with people. So it could be that because of a lack of communication, contact, human contact, that actually there's been for many organizations a slight disconnect between the workforce and the organizations for whom they're employed. So what would be interesting, back to sort of this area of Simon's dissertation question, is to what extent has the pandemic itself created an environment that's made some of these challenges even more so? And is that a kind of an artificial influencer that has created these problems, or is there something more fundamental, perhaps coming back to what we talked about earlier with Julian Birkinshaw's work on democracy and purpose-driven organizations? I don't know. It's not sure that we know the answer to that, but yeah, I don't know if I've answered that question sufficiently, but I think it's obviously something that manager needs to try and reestablish pride. I mean, if he's got pride, does he have pride in the company?
Yeah.
I think assuming he does, then there's everything to go for. If he doesn't, well, I suspect he'll find another job somewhere at some point.
Interesting. I'm just conscious of time, and I would encourage anyone to again put any questions they've got into the chat function. If there's any burning things you want to ask Phil about regarding sales, professionalizing sales, please do put a question in chat. Otherwise, I'll ask my own question.
Okay, thank you, Will.
So, as we are emerging from the pandemic, and I'm certainly seeing that we're meeting up with customers face to face now, and there's a sort of energy kind of emerging as we get into 2022. What are you looking forward to the most this year in terms of what you haven't been able to do in the last 2 years?
Well, I think that it's doing just that. It's actually seeing people in a face-to-face environment. Now, I recently took a long-haul trip over to Singapore, and just the process of getting on a plane and traveling. Interestingly, when Consalia was first formed in 2006, about 80% of our business was international. And, my typical month was spent, maybe 2 weeks of the month were sort of traveling around the world, sort of working with clients and also visiting some of our offices in the different countries. I think the thing that I'm really looking forward to is actually just looking at people face to face. And I'm absolutely convinced that there's a pent-up demand for both customers and salespeople. I think there's a pent-up opportunity to actually be ahead of the game by getting out there quickly and actually not relying on Zoom or Teams for meetings, but actually meeting people in person. So that's what I'm really looking forward to. And it started to happen already, and I'm really looking forward to it continuing.
That's great. So am I. Caroline has actually put a question into chat. So what's your view on the concept of non-quota bearing salespeople?
God, Caroline, that's such a great question. I love that question. Okay, so there's non-quota bearing salespeople, there's a school of thought that one of the great levers for driving sales performance is the KPIs driven around quota bearing targets and so on. And it's definitely a tool that's used at a strategic level, to get people focused on the things that the managers need to the key objectives. And it's like an escalation. It starts with how people get remunerated at senior level, and it filters all the way down through to the salespeople. I have to say that I think that in many cases it drives a non-client centric behavior. And so if you're defining sales success around meeting and exceeding customer expectations, I think there's a strong argument to say that you're more likely to achieve that through salespeople who are non-quota bearing, because the customer knows that the salespeople are not out there to meet a target. They're not out there to sell, some stock that they need to shift pretty quickly. They're out there purely to serve the interests of the customer. And so I know this is slightly controversial because, you're basically saying, I think you should, potentially get rid of targets for salespeople or sales targets. And that's not quite what I'm saying. But I am moving in, slightly towards that direction. I know that in some organizations, because of the buying cycle of customers could be over a 2-year period, is that they have a high percentage of the remuneration is fixed and a small percentage is quota bearing. But I think that I've always held the view that if you start from the customer's perspective and work backwards, you'll always find the right answers. So this whole topic of quota bearing, if you get customers giving you a point of view, to what extent would that be aligned with the supplier point of view as far as salespeople are concerned? Given that only 10% of salespeople sell in a way customers want, according to our research, I would suggest that those organizations have the courage to explore non-quota bearing, perhaps could come out of it rather well, perhaps selling more than they would have done otherwise. But I'm very happy to be shot down here on this AMA session that we've got with people with different points of view. I don't know, Caroline, if you want to comment on what I've just shared.
I think it's an interesting answer, Phil. It's just something that's been mooted in certain quarters, and I was just interested in what your views were on it. Actually, I'm quite long in the tooth, and non-quota bearing salespeople is quite a unique phenomenon to me.
There's a fabulous book which is sort of Zen and the Art of Archery. I don't know if you've come across it. It's a serious book written by a German philosopher who went out to Japan, and it was about it was literally learning how to fire an arrow to hit a target, and he describes the frustration he had in the first sort of 4 years of learning to become a master archer. The first 2 years were just about breathing and pulling the bowstring. It was nothing to do with the target. And the master that was coaching him never looked at where his arrows went. They simply looked at what it was that he was doing to hit target. By the end of his 4 years, he hit target all the time. So I'm kind of interested in this whole notion of leading and lagging indicators, which is kind of connected to this non-quota bearing kind of concept. And if you're doing the right things, the results will follow. But I suspect, and we tend to start at the whole topic of values and beliefs. If salespeople are acting in the right way and doing the right things, the right results will follow. So if your reason for quota bearing is driving behavior, I'm not sure that you should use remuneration necessarily to force it. I think you should look at other areas, but I suspect a combination of the both is what to look at. And I think we're more in favor of company performance bonus schemes rather than individual performance bonus schemes. So you're all sharing in the success of the organization. But I know that this is a kind of maverick view, and it's just a point of view I've got. And I'm not sure necessarily it works in every organization that we work with. Sorry, Caroline. Well, what do you think? Do you think it's a risky idea?
I'm interested to put it into the group and see if people agree or disagree with your comments.
Yeah, love the debate.
Yeah.
It's
put it to the vote.
Yeah.
Put it to the vote. No, it is. It's really good. It's a really good point. I mean, we don't have quota bearing salespeople inside Consalia. We work towards a company scheme. And that was because at an early stage, we saw it drove individualistic behavior, and we felt that wasn't in the interests of our customers. But that's us. It's not necessarily the case with our customers. So really interesting debate, Caroline. I'd love to follow up on this with you at some point. Thank you.
Great.
Okay,
well, I'm very conscious of the time. We're reaching the hour. Just wanted to say a big thank you for everyone that submitted questions and engaged throughout this AMA with Phil. We would be delighted if you could share feedback and whether or not this was useful, because we're planning to do a few more of them throughout the year. And so, yeah, just on behalf of Consalia, thank you very much. Phil, I don't know if you have any comments you want to say?
No, just thank you. I've really enjoyed the conversation and yeah, the free-form questions in particular, you know, the ones that come out of the blue.
Yeah. We've covered a lot.
Yeah, we have. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. It's been a pleasure
Thank
from
you.
our point of view. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.